Climbing games are weirdly... hang on a sec. Climbing games are weirdly hot right now. That's not something I really had on my 2025 bingo card, but here we are. I think for a lot of people, myself included, that has manifested in playing a lot of a game called Peak. Now, Peak is an excellent little co-op game about climbing up a mountain with your friends that has become a massive runaway success. It honestly bears more in common with something like Lethal Company or Repo, where you and your friends work towards a common goal, which in this case, rather than collecting enough trinkets to meet a quota, just happens to be reaching the top of this geologically impossible mountain that is constantly trying to kill you, and you experience hilarious deaths and mess with each other using proximity chat along the way. You know, the usual stuff.
Damn it.
Oh, what the
Oh my god!
Ow, ow!
Oh no, oh no!
Ow.
Go! I'm dead. Goodbye. Bye. Do you want to see something cool?
What are you doing? No! No! What are you doing?
But undeniably, climbing is the central mechanic here. It's the main way you interact with and progress through the game. This recent surge of interest in climbing as a central mechanic can probably be traced back to Breath of the Wild. Now, listen, before you say, what about this other game? Sure, okay, fine. You're right, you're so smart, everyone is very proud of you. But just hear me out. Good climbing mechanics have been kind of a white whale in games, in my experience, because there's really two ways you can go with it, and neither of them really fully satisfies what climbing is actually like in reality with all its technical nuance. On one hand, you have what I'll call on-rails climbing, like Assassin's Creed or Uncharted, where there are a lot of different objects, nooks, crannies, and ledges you can climb, but every climbing interaction is deliberately made, placed there by the devs intending for you to find and ultimately climb it. This is the way a lot of games approach climbing, especially AAA games that aren't mostly about climbing, to just make sure that everywhere you can climb kind of makes sense and works properly. Not to mention leads to something or somewhere. As a result, you kind of lose the sense of exploration and discovery that you might expect out of a game centered around, you know, climbing. Since you always know that if a cliffside or a building has handholds on it, you'll be able to climb it and reach the top of it without much issue, and if not, tough luck. Then on the flip side, you have something like Breath of the Wild, where climbing is extremely simple mechanically, involving basically just one button. But the trade-off is that you can climb essentially anything, whether there's any need to or not. There's just enough depth there, managing your stamina, jumping when you need an extra little boost, and so on, that it manages to be satisfyingly engaging without ever defining what the game is about, or being especially challenging. I'm sure everyone who has played it has some memorable moments where they thought their stamina was toast only to just barely be able to scramble up that last little bit of cliffside. And that's by design, by the way. Anyways, that was only like a minute of me talking positively about Nintendo, and I already think I'm gonna throw up. The truth is that even in games that aren't about climbing and don't feature climbing as a main mechanic or even a mechanic at all, gamers seem to always want to climb things. Whether it's scaling the tallest building in Los Santos just to drive your car off the top, glitching up the tallest mountains in Skyrim on your horse. Hell, how many people got the double jump in Cyberpunk and just started jumping up buildings? There's basically nothing at all to do or see up there, but it's cool that the game just lets you do it. And for me, this actually produced a lot of my favorite gameplay moments in this game flat out. Even though it doesn't reward you with loot or story beats, there's something about getting up on top of Night City and looking down that in its own way feels rewarding, and maybe even like CD Projekt Red thought you might try this, even if there wasn't really an extrinsic reason to do it. The point I'm getting at here is that while climbing is not the main or only way you get around in a game like Breath of the Wild, despite its relative simplicity, it very elegantly addresses that primal desire to climb literally everything you see. It's not an easy thing to pull off, and it's not exactly perfect in Breath of the Wild either, but it was all done to a memorable enough degree of success that when gamers look at a game with freeform climbing and a stamina meter, they instantly go, Breath of the Wild! As if Nintendo invented the entire idea of climbing itself. Just like gamers have this unifying masculine urge to dig really big holes, shout out Jacob Geller, it seems most of us also have a unifying urge to just climb shit as well. And for this reason, I'm not surprised that games more specifically about climbing are getting their time in the sun. But what I am surprised about is that we are getting so many interesting and distinct takes on climbing all at once. The runaway success of Peak is one really interesting case. This game basically has the simplistic core climbing mechanics of Breath of the Wild. You can climb anything as long as you have the stamina to support it, by just getting close to it and clicking on it. You can make a little leap to gain some extra ground, but at the cost of exhausting your stamina more quickly. And that's about it. The game will be easy to pick up for just about anyone and practically second nature if you've played those modern Zelda games. But the depth in this game comes from the co-op interactions. Helping your friends make climbs they're just short the stamina for, dropping down ropes for them and creating pathways of pitons for your friends to have an easier time climbing, and so on and so forth. You can still play this game solo, sure, but it really shines when you get a few friends on the mountain with you, and playing this game with friends has created some of the best moments I've had in gaming this year. Skull boy!
Commune.
Oh shit, I don't even have enough either. I don't have enough either.
Commune.
It's game over.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
I'm gonna fucking commune.
Commune. He fucking died!
Holy shit, bro, he did it.
That skull saved our asses, dude.
Yeah, it did. That was...
I did not use it.
It was GG's if not for the skull.
Imagine not having enough stamina.
I think you just have to get on it.
Where's the E? It won't let me hold. Oh, I'm holding. I was like, oh my god.
Imagine.
I was freaking the fuck out.
Yeah, baby. But as the observant among you have probably already noticed, as much as I love Peak and I could do a whole video on it, this video is actually not mostly about Peak. If Peak is this cheery, colorful, and warm experience with the prevailing message being that we can accomplish more together and that anything is possible through the power of friendship or whatever, then the game that I'm talking about today is one designed to make you feel alone, up against impossible odds and forces beyond your comprehension, and that the only way out is through sheer, stubborn perseverance while grappling with an esoteric and sometimes outright hostile set of mechanics. It is a completely diametrically opposite interpretation of climbing as an entire concept, and yet it is also completely fascinating. And for me, one of the best gaming experiences I've had this year. And that game is White Knuckle. Now, White Knuckle is a lot of things. Among them, a mechanically intense climbing sim, a compelling and mysterious retro horror game set in a decaying megastructure crawling with monsters. It is also what most people would probably call a roguelike. But more importantly than any of those descriptors individually, it's a really compelling whole that transcends just being the sum of these individual parts. It has interesting takes on and things to say about each of these components that culminate in one of the freshest and most memorable gaming experiences I've had this year. I think a great place to start with White Knuckle is just defining what exactly it is, which it turns out is not the easiest task without just telling you to go play it. I have a hard time pinning this game down as strictly a roguelike. I mean, it is, but not in such a way that it is at all defined by being a roguelike. At least insofar as a roguelike consists of losing progress and having to start from more or less scratch when you die. Sure, that is how White Knuckle works as well. You do occasionally get to checkpoints with these computer terminals where you can take upgrades that will either give you a timed buff or last your entire run, at least until you fully die and run out of extra lives. And a big part of your progression is managing the items that you hold in your limited inventory space, which too are lost on death. There's even a little bit of meta progression in the form of banking up golden bugs at vending machines, which will last between runs and allow you to stock up on items. As you progress, you'll unlock new items and rooms to encounter as well, but despite all of this, when explaining White Knuckle to someone, I wouldn't really lead with it being a roguelike, despite doing that pretty much exactly just now. But if only because I feel like this sets up the expectation that the game is about getting upgrades and unlocking meta progression items to a far greater degree than it is. Instead, I actually have a different comparison for this game. That's right, Bennett Foddy, creator of games like QWOP, or perhaps what most people will know him for, Getting Over It. Foddy's games are mechanically obtuse to a degree that is pretty actively hostile to the player. Despite that, there can be a real satisfaction in mastering these goofy games' mechanical quirks. It's like learning how to walk. Additionally, these games, and particularly Getting Over It, are defined by their progression framework as well, where a misstep can lead to a fall, causing you to physically lose a ton of progress. You don't fall off a ledge and then respawn where you jumped from, you just fall. I think it's quite cool how Foddy and his imitators, sometimes referred to as Foddian or just rage games, have turned progression into a measurable physical thing, where the heights that you can reach are defined by your mechanical mastery and knowledge, and making mistakes lead to a direct loss of progress, causing you to have to repeat areas you've been through. It can be frustrating, but as Foddy's commentary in Getting Over It will mention, it also kind of makes your journey unique from everyone else's. And White Knuckle is getting over it, but with climbing. Okay, I'm sort of kidding. I feel like that statement probably just enraged like at least 10% of people watching, but I think there's some merit to this idea. White Knuckle is a roguelike. Yes, this is true. But whereas so many other roguelikes, or maybe more accurately roguelites, since I know some of you are going to be weird about that distinction, are about building and fine-tuning your perk selections and losing and getting a like 5% meta buff to damage or whatever, and then winning and then getting a little stronger and moving up to the next difficulty and rinse and repeat and so on and so forth. Instead, in White Knuckle, your main progression system is by far your mastery of the mechanics. And maybe the main point that I'm getting at here is that while so many other roguelikes are designed as such with just the intention of giving you more game to gnaw on, White Knuckle sending you back to the beginning when you die serves the purpose of encouraging you to get better at the mechanics of the game. Before long, you'll be able to fly through the game's early areas, collecting a ton of items and really preparing for later challenges. And it makes those moments where you're able to climb higher than ever before so rewarding. Like, you really earn that shit. Let's actually talk about those climbing mechanics, because while I wanted to clear up what type of game White Knuckle is, because I think people may have strong reactions to my comparisons to roguelikes and Bennett Foddy that I wanted to kind of put at ease, the reality is that the actual nitty-gritty mechanics are what is going to make or break most people's enjoyment of this game. On the spectrum of climbing mechanics that I outlined, made up, White Knuckle actually lands at a pretty comfortable middle ground. It's not quite so free that the game allows you to climb any surface, mostly, but the game allows and even encourages you to use the preset handholds, placeable items and consumables, level geometry, and momentum to really get creative in how you traverse obstacles. The levels in this game are not completely procedural, but are instead made up of tile sets of many different but actually handcrafted rooms, stitched together differently each time you start a run. While you could make the argument that this will eventually produce samey feeling runs, through a few tens of hours, this hasn't been my experience at all. I like that I could recognize patterns and remember how I approached something in the past, but even still, I rarely found myself traversing the same room the exact same way twice due to varying angles of approach, having different items or upgrades, or ultimately just spotting an item I wanted to grab on a ledge somewhere and just routing differently to go pick it up. So while this game uses that slightly more on-rails, handhold-oriented style of climbing, the variety of mechanical approaches you can take for each obstacle leads this game to feel much more free-form and expressive in how you can climb than something like an Assassin's Creed, which will just shuttle you linearly through a preset path of handholds without much nuance at all. The mechanical depth of White Knuckle is really carried by the way you actually engage with these handholds and obstacles, however. When you have your feet on flat ground, you can walk and run, but climbing is done with these two little hands on your screen. You just look at whatever you want to grab and then left click to grab it with your left hand, or right click to grab it with your right hand, or both. You can then maneuver around on these handholds a bit, leverage your momentum to get closer to the next one, swing and release for a little fling, jump to gain some height, and so on. This is all fairly simple to grasp on a basic level, but undoubtedly hard to master. So much so that I very much doubt the ceiling of mastery for this game has been found yet, and I doubt it will for a good while, if ever. The game has a tutorial that I think at least does an admirable job of conveying the basics to you without going so far as to spell out every single intricacy that these systems have. There's really a lot to discover, and I think plenty of room to develop your own playstyle and unique strategies as well. But also through repetition of various obstacles and areas, you will start to intuit some of the best practices, or at least learn to creatively skirt said best practices. And honestly, the poking, prodding, and limit testing along the way is one of the best parts of this game, even if it sometimes ends up like this. This is a fun segment. Uh-oh. I'm gonna die. Get out of here. No? It's gonna start again. Oh, you're kidding me! I can only crouch there? The first thing you'll really be grappling with when learning the ins and outs of this game, at least once you get the basic controls down, is managing your stamina. White Knuckle has a pretty cool diegetic stamina system where each of your hands has its own stamina meter, indicated by your hands slowly turning red until you will lose your grip. You can obviously alternate hands to give each one a temporary rest, but before long you have to let go with both hands and let them rest if you hope to keep climbing. And you will, it's kind of the whole point of the game. Like, it ain't called Red Knuckle. You can also eat food that you find along the way to restore your hand stamina in a pinch to help you through some of those longer climbing stretches without having to find the time to go completely hands off to recover. So this all plays into your inventory management as well. You can hold a limited amount of items in here before you become encumbered and will get slowed down by carrying too many things. You also have access to a slot for each of your hands where you can quickly access one item each. The system was a little awkward for me at first, but it didn't take long to get the hang of it, and once I did, I realized this system, though a bit unique and quirky, is actually kind of perfect for this game. It's a little difficult to describe exactly why, but it really feels like this was the best way to make your entire inventory accessible in a pinch when you need it, while still preserving some depth in inventory management. And learning to swiftly navigate this little inventory window and juggle items between your hands adeptly is going to be important to progressing much. You can also stock up and place down your own handholds like pitons, which have to be hammered into the wall, and rebar, which can be thrown, knocking you back a bit. Fun fact, that little bit of knockback is enough to throw you off a handhold, so make sure you got 2 feet on solid ground when you throw one. Or I guess if you're feeling spicy, this knockback also works as kind of a double jump. Pretty cool. There's actually lots of hidden depth in how you can engage with these items, but most interestingly, I'm pretty sure that every room in this game is actually designed to be traversed with no items and just your base mechanics. This was something I was actually worried about as I progressed through the campaign for this game for the first time. It's not to say that every following area is just as easy as the first, because that is just not true. But I was worried that the difficulty of this game would be defined by increasingly sparse handholds, longer stretches of uninterrupted climbing, forcing you to eat food to manage your stamina, thus kind of offloading all of the challenge to engaging with inventory management. It's not to say this isn't still important and can't be exactly what you need to make a quick maneuver or avoid certain deaths sometimes, but the game rarely forces you to dig in your inventory for a specific item to progress. And I'm actually glad about this, and I think it lands better as a result. The game applies ample friction in other ways, which we'll talk about, and ultimately, you will still find yourself grabbing a piton or rebar or something else to get an edge, to escape a tough situation or just make progress a little more quickly and easily to prevent a sticky situation later down the line. It's actually difficult to talk in much more depth on the levels and how you interact with them without talking first about the horror elements of White Knuckle. And although I wouldn't lead by talking about the ways White Knuckle is a horror game, it is also that, and it's important to touch on since it becomes deeply integrated with the gameplay and level design as the game goes on. Now, listen, I wouldn't typically describe myself as being a fan of horror games. It's not actually anything against horror as a theme or a vibe. I'm not like a coward. I think my issue is really that so many horror games boil down to just like being about being scared primarily. It's kind of weird. I definitely don't mind being scared or just confronting uncomfortable feelings in games in general. But when it's like the only thing the game is about, I'm just not all that into that. On the other hand, when a game reels me in with mechanics I'm interested in and then uses them to scare the shit out of me, hell yeah, I love that. Games like Subnautica, Prey, Dishonored, all games that most people wouldn't lead by describing as horror, but that twist horror elements and themes in interesting ways that complement the gameplay on offer there. Subnautica in particular really changed my thinking about horror games. It's one of the scariest games I've ever played because of the way it immerses you in its setting before slowly introducing those horror themes. And it makes me realize how much of a miss it is that so much popular horror-themed media is about ghosts and demons and shit like that, and how little of it actually confronts the real things that tons of people are afraid of, like heights or the vastness of the ocean, and what kinds of horrors are lurking in the deepest, darkest depths, something that Subnautica expertly and subversively tackles. And one of my favorite films is Take Shelter. It'd be hard to call this a horror movie, but when I was young, I was deathly afraid of storms. I've lived most of my life in the Midwest where we get storms and tornadoes and stuff all the time. But I was an anxious kid and I just imagined a tornado like destroying my house and uprooting my family. And I don't know, the thought of that was just really scary to me, that this could happen and there would be potentially nothing I could do about it. Now, I got over this fear as an adult, and hell, I just had a tornado hit my area while I was playing Peak, ironically enough, and this is how I reacted.
Oh god, my phone's freaking out. Tornado warning. Tornado warning.
Oh, you're getting a tornado warning? It's probably fine.
When that went off, the fucking the lights flickered in my place too.
The sirens are going off. I'm gonna go. Man.
It's so much more important to make it.
I'm scared.
I'm scared too, but we gotta do this.
We're all scared, Lindsay.
It's a life or death situation.
There's no easy path in life, Lindsay. Yeah, there's probably a middle ground here that would be a little more appropriate, but It is what it is. Take Shelter is still deeply relatable to me though, both in how it captures the paranoia I had as a kid that something like a storm could just destroy my home and my family and I couldn't really do anything about it. But it's also shown through the lens of Michael Shannon's character's descent into paranoid schizophrenia, which manifests as visions of terrible storms. And it kind of does tear his family apart like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Something that I, and I'm sure a lot of other people can relate to having a fear of as well. Just completely losing your mind and sanity, your sense of self and what's real. Anyways, while Take Shelter isn't what I'd typically describe as a horror film, I think media like this, along with games like Subnautica, gave me a greater appreciation of the media that tackles more mundane and primal fears head on. Now, don't get me wrong, White Knuckle is definitely a horror game, with no asterisks. There's like monsters and shit. But it's actually at least a little bit subversive in how it introduces and presents its horror themes. One thing I am not exactly afraid of is heights. I have what you'd maybe call a healthy trepidation around heights that keeps me from doing like stupid shit on a hike or like being one of those dudes that scales buildings. But I don't get much more than that little tingle in my leg when I look down from a tall building or out from a mountain or cliff. That said, heights are something that video games have a really interesting dilemma with tackling. Usually games don't trigger any kind of fear response for me when it comes to heights. A lot of times this is just due to games' relative struggle to represent large distances at scale. And even in games where you can get up really high and sometimes fall, I think it's hard for games to capture a real feeling of danger from heights when a lot of times you could just land in a puddle of water to survive a fall, or you like always have a parachute that you can pull, or at absolute worst, a fall just means you respawn right back where you started. Then on the flip side though, there's something like Mirror's Edge, where when you fall, you're with your character until her bones literally shatter on the ground. It's really shockingly brutal and captures what I'd imagine falling to your death might actually kind of feel like. And it does improve the game because it instills a real psychological aversion to falling in you as you play. White Knuckle doesn't quite have the same brutality associated with falling, but I think at least a little bit of vertigo when you look down on the stretch of megastructure you've traversed so far, combined with the mechanical stakes of just going all the way back when you fall, do make every jump, step, and reach for the next handhold sufficiently palm-sweatingly intense. I think White Knuckle represents a really nice middle ground between mechanical pressure to not fall and a good representation of climbing and heights that conveys at least a bit of vertigo without just being a torture chamber for the height-averse. And this core is enhanced by the more traditional horror themes that it slowly introduces along the way. Through this first area, you won't really encounter too many significant threats outside of just the various climbing challenges, other than the occasional mosquito that you swat back with your hammer and these barnacles that are immobile but send out these tentacles that you can get caught in. But the first stretch of areas does see you contending with the game's first source of pressure to keep climbing up at a solid pace, and that is the ooze, I guess? Or is this more of a sludge? Maybe a slime, perhaps? I don't know. This blob will slowly but steadily creep upwards as you climb, constantly pressuring you to keep making upward progress, and eventually being there to cushion your fall should you lose your grip. Did I say cushion? Yeah, it pretty much just dissolves you instantly. I really like this though. Slow but unstoppable forces are another kind of underutilized horror trope in my opinion. And I think it's a nice gentle way to kick off not only this game's particular brand of speed climbing, but also the horror themes present here. And you might be like, that's not exactly what I would describe as gentle, but trust me, dude, when you see what's coming up, you'll be begging for the damn ooze back. I guess ooze is just the name I'm going with here. The ooze is the main looming threat that will follow you for the first major chunk of the game. You get a little area of reprieve where you can seal it off and get a second to save your game, grab some upgrades and items, but it doesn't take long before it breaks containment and is following you up into the next area as well. In general, White Knuckle applies pressure on you to keep moving in a lot of different ways, while additionally throwing challenges that will cause you to slow down and think about how you should approach something, or just recuperate some stamina. I think the ooze introduces this concept in a really enjoyable and simple way that creates a fun pace as you make your way through the substructure and pipeworks area. The pipeworks has a few different sub-regions that will each introduce more new hazards like leaking pipes with damaging steam, bugs that explode knocking you back, though they can also be leveraged for a boost if you play your cards right, and just in general, larger expanses to traverse without as many spots to rest. My only complaint about this area is that you occasionally run into a straightaway that allows the ooze to just catch up to you. You can obviously combat this by just playing fast and keeping a buffer between you and it, but I don't know, man, sometimes shit happens. And getting caught in a situation where you can't do anything but just die kind of feels bad. and at least a little out of place in a way that is a rarity for this game, at least in my experience. Real quick before we move on from the ooze, I did just want to talk about one of my favorite segments in the entire game, and that is the elevator interlude. I actually made a short a while back about this segment where I posed a question. Would you consider this a boss fight? And the answers were pretty interesting and surprisingly split pretty much right down the middle. In the absolute most puritanical sense, no, this probably can't qualify as a boss, especially not a boss fight. White Knuckle isn't completely free of anything resembling combat, but it'd be a huge stretch to say that this game really has much of anything akin to combat. You can whack bugs or barnacles a few times with your hammer to get rid of them, and some future encounters have specific items and strategies that deal with various monsters as well, but that's it. And the elevator itself has no pressure except for time as the ooze continues creeping towards you all while you're stuck here. Since White Knuckle's complexity is mostly offloaded to the climbing mechanics, it stands to reason though that something like a boss encounter would be focused on testing your climbing mechanics rather than anything resembling combat. And that is where the elevator comes in. And why labeling this as anything close to a boss fight is kind of controversial, I suppose. You ride this thing up a bit to get some distance from the approaching ooze, but then it malfunctions and you can't take it any higher. To get it going again, you have a series of switches to hit with a limited time to do so. And good luck. I really appreciate this segment for a few reasons. For one, while the entire previous segment is an escalating challenge throwing different hazards at you, it's hard to say there's any real specific skill check, especially since there's no guarantee that you will see the same rooms in the same order each run. The elevator, though, is that consistent test of everything you've learned so far. Notable because it's the same every time, it has a learnable set of instructions, but it's also quite an escalation of challenge, at least the first time you see it. And if you didn't arrive with solid climbing fundamentals or a bag full of items, well, let's just say there isn't much stopping you from death should you slip up and fall here. Despite that, the point of my case that this should qualify as a boss fight that was met with the most disagreement was whether or not the elevator segment was difficult enough of a skill check to qualify as a boss fight. To which I say, first of all, are there not plenty of boss fights that are both easier than this and definitely still boss fights? Second, I don't believe something qualifying as a boss fight or a skill check is really defined by its difficulty. It's kind of in the nature of a skill check. You know, that first ledge in a platformer game that you have to double jump to get over is a skill check. And most people can handle hitting the jump button twice and getting past this first try, but it doesn't make it not a skill check. Either way, White Knuckle's elevator is, of course, substantially harder than that. The essence of this challenge is that you have to navigate from the broken down elevator to 3 separate switches, each separated by some pretty solidly tough climbing challenges. The key difference with this area from everything before it is that it is the same exact layout every time. So there are learnable strategies to consistently get past it. I think this is maybe where the sentiment that this is too easy or not enough of a skill check to be a boss comes from, but it's also why I completely disagree. The essence of a skill check is that it is a test of your skills. Go figure. So it stands to reason that once you develop the prerequisite skills to get past this consistently, it's not going to pose much of a threat to you anymore. It doesn't make it not a skill check though, and my first clear of this area was one of the coolest light bulb moments I've had in a game in a long time. Like, yeah, I can fly through it now, but that's not the point. In a similar sense that when you learn the moves of a Dark Souls boss, take less hits and manage your resources better and eventually triumph, and maybe even go on to take no hits and just absolutely style on the boss, it doesn't make a Dark Souls boss not difficult. I think the elevator still qualifies as a significant skill check, serving White Knuckle's climbing-focused gameplay in the same way a boss fight would serve a game, with a focus on traditional combat. This encounter even has 2 phases. After you hit these 3 switches, you have one final test. You navigate to a control room. You have a lot of time to feel out this path that you'll take to get there, but then once you hit that final switch, you have 30 seconds to navigate all the way back to the elevator. And this is a really awesome putting it all together moment the first time through. My first time, I wasn't prepared to speed back and I missed my ride. But coming back prepared and really nailing this was awesome and super satisfying. It's probably my favorite moment of White Knuckle so far. Much like a boss fight, there's layers to the complexity of the elevator segment too. If you save up enough rebar, you can actually hit these first 3 switches by just throwing rebar at them. It's a little harder than it might seem to aim since they have a bit of drop off too. But this is a cheeky little skip for this first platforming segment. I've been told the second part can be skipped with a rebar jump as well, and I've even seen someone do this entire segment without so much as touching any of the switches or even activating the elevator at all. This is of course super niche, but it's cool that the game even lets you do this stuff. And in general, while it'd be a stretch to call this game an immersive sim, I found the depth of possible interactions here to be approaching something like an immersive sim. The narrow scope of gameplay I think probably still disqualifies it, but I don't know, I've seen dumber shit labeled as an immersive sim. All to say, within the framework of the game's mechanics, it is pretty flexible in what all it will let you do, and the elevator showcases this depth really wonderfully. Now, before I move on much further, I think this is a great time to talk about challenge in this game. I've mainly been focusing on the campaign because I feel like the campaign of this game introduces you to, well, basically everything important, and it does so in a way that feels well-paced, well thought out, and the most structured narratively. I think what's on offer in the campaign will give someone brand new to this game a good handful of hours of content to chew on before they reach the current end of early access. For me, it took about 10 hours, with at least a few more hours in the demo. Your mileage may vary if you're not a streamer with a penchant for getting distracted by chat and screwing around in the name of content. But if you're one of those people who ends up finding the elevator too easy, or are just in general worried you might spend all this time sharpening your teeth on the mechanics present in the areas of the campaign only to run out of stuff to do, don't worry. White Knuckle's got you covered. As you work your way through the campaign, you will slowly not only unlock new areas that will be seamlessly injected into your runs through the campaign, but you'll also unlock endless modes, challenge maps, and eventually hard mode to continue chewing on. The endless modes in particular, I was really surprised by. Not only are they just a nice way to jump in and practice an area you might want to get better at without starting an entire new run, but I was pleasantly surprised that each of these had unique content to offer as well. The endless maps are not just campaign areas stitched together in a new way, and in fact there is completely brand new content on offer in these. From individual rooms that, at least to me, didn't look similar to anything I'd seen in the campaign, all the way to entirely new areas which I will not spoil completely. Likewise, the challenge maps are handcrafted new experiences for the game with interesting takes and spins on the basic gameplay systems. Hard mode likewise has some tweaks to enemy spawns and progression systems that will offer a pretty solid step up in challenge as you navigate through the levels. It definitely felt harder as I played a bit, but I wasn't able to pinpoint exactly what all was different. But regardless, good luck. It is also worth mentioning that getting to the end, or in Endless's case just getting through a loop, is not always the end-all be-all of this game. It can be a real blast to learn how to tackle obstacles faster and more efficiently, and I expect this game is going to have insanely long legs for speedrunning. Hell, even just racing your Steam friends can be a blast, and the current world record for the campaign mode already looks like a pretty much different game than me just playing this game. And I'm like decent at worst at this point. Just gives you an idea how high the ceiling for this game will be. Now, it's pretty wild to say, but the elevator is basically just the end of the free demo. There are some changes and new content in the full release, as is expected, but if you just want a taste of this game for free, White Knuckle's demo is maybe one of the best I've ever played, and you could easily sink 10 or more hours into it alone. I also mention this because, I don't know, people get weird about me talking about new early access games. I think when done well, early access is a perfectly viable strategy for indies, and it's honestly sometimes the only way really visionary games get made by indie devs at all. But it is also your prerogative to just not buy or play early access games. I get that. I'm not like sponsored by White Knuckle or whatever. I don't give a shit if you buy it, other than that I just think it's good and that you should check it out if it seems interesting to you. So while I'm going to talk at least a little bit about what comes after the elevator, which at risk of people clicking off the video is very cool and worth experiencing for yourself if this game seems interesting to you, I do just want to make you aware of this demo as well. I think it's a great experience that stands on its own if you just want a taste of what this game has to offer before shelving it for full release, if that's how you prefer to roll. Now, past the elevator is where this game starts to really earn that horror tag. Whereas before it's kind of just creepy vibes and the occasional tentacle, from here on out shit gets a lot more weird. And like, right away. The first time through this next area, you get this little set piece where you have to go through this brief dark area to hit a switch, during which you have to manage a flashlight that will slowly dim until it needs to be cranked again, requiring you to use it in one of your hands. I quite like this mechanic overall, but I'm glad the game isn't just pitch black from here on out, requiring constant micromanagement of your light level. But it is an interesting little tool that the game tucks into its toolbox that definitely adds some tension to certain segments. And the theme of the game just adding tools to its toolbox is really what I overall want to highlight throughout this segment. If the first handful of areas are focused on teaching you the mechanics, introducing you to various pressures to keep you moving, and then testing how well you've mastered them before allowing you to move on, the following areas are basically pulling back the curtain on just how insane things can get. And about that darkness, don't worry, I'm sure it's not a big deal.
What the hell?
So yeah, right away you have a pretty terrifying dark segment because not only are you climbing straight up over a bottomless void with no ooze to catch your fall and up into the darkness, but there's also something in the darkness. Now, I have no idea what this thing is called. I'm sure someone in the comments will tell me, but it's basically this mess of arms and dark void that will chase after you and slowly strangle you, effectively ending your run should you get cornered and caught. You have some options though. For one, the climbing in this area is, in my opinion, not super difficult. If you've gotten a solid grasp on the mechanics that the game has introduced to you thus far, you can actually move pretty quickly up this shaft. This monster doesn't always just beeline to you, it actually has to detect you first. So if you're moving away from it fast enough, you can actually just kind of escape it. You can even duck into vents where it won't be able to follow you, even if it does start to chase you. It will disappear and re-emerge closer to you as you climb up, but you can just rinse and repeat. Should you find this guy bearing down on you though, the game does equip you with something else that will help you, and that is the flare gun. And the flare gun is pretty cool, but this is where I start to have some critiques of this segment, honestly. I think escaping this monster, dipping into vents, and trying to outrun it when you can is pretty compelling, and a nice change of pace from the ooze. And though getting caught and killed by it does feel pretty bad and hopeless, what I don't find super compelling is being given like 5 free uses of a go away button. Because when you pop this guy with a flare, he'll just go away for a bit, allowing you to climb in peace. He comes back, but yeah, this is really going to trivialize this area quite a bit for you. Unlike the elevator, this isn't really a test of skill in any way. It's just like, did you remember to pick up the hard counter we gave you a few seconds ago? The flare gun itself is a neat idea in theory, especially since you will from here on out encounter more areas with low light levels, but the flashlight is already powerful enough and throws light far enough that I didn't really find myself using the flare gun for light almost ever. And beyond the dark tentacle monster, I didn't really find that the flare gun had any notable interactions with anything else beyond this point. Though that could just be on me for not experimenting with it more. What I did try and shoot it at didn't instill much confidence that it had any other notable interactions. Maybe the developers have bigger plans for it down the line, but as it is, despite excellent shock factor and great atmosphere, I find this segment falls unfortunately flat compared to how cool it could have been. And it bucks the game's trend of introducing and then ultimately expanding on and testing your mastery of new mechanics in an interesting and intuitive way. But I'll give it some lenience since the flare gun could still really shine later on. It's worth mentioning that it has quite a bit of kickback and can be used like the rebar to get a jump boost, which is pretty cool, of course. But I find it disappointing if the flare gun's utility down the stretch of this entire game will amount to just being yet another tool for going up faster. It feels like it could have far more potential than that for interesting interactions, and it just being a boosting tool is far from ever explained or telegraphed as intuitively as its other functions. Beyond this point, there's a string of shorter areas that are mostly just climbing challenges, including an outdoor docks area where big upward stretches can be traversed using operable cranes. Super cool. I found it to honestly be a bit easier and quicker to just climb the wall and not use the cranes, but I do appreciate whenever this game includes ways to interact with the world other than just climbing. It adds a lot of potential variety and just makes the world feel more alive and sells this kind of facade that these are real support spaces for some megastructure where people lived and worked, instead of just a horrific jungle gym. I think it's important that the game gives these gameplay breathers too. Don't get me wrong, this and other areas like it that are pretty much just about climbing can still be crazy stressful, but I actually quite like that the game decided against having constant pressure on the player. It creates a nice compression and release that makes the oh shit moments where something new crawls out of the vents all the more effective. And there's still enough reminders that your ultimate goal is to go faster and move more efficiently, like handholds that eventually break, which are new as of the previous area, that the game still gets its point across without essentially just constantly putting you on a timer. I think this is another point that I want to get across as to what White Knuckle does so successfully, and that is that the game applies pressure on the player in an extremely interesting variety of ways that suggests the developers had an excellent grasp on how players would engage with the game, but without ever feeling like the game is just telling you how to play. It's something as simple as a slow, upward moving kill plane that just nudges you into the mindset that you gotta keep moving. It's a flashlight that you have to keep cranking to keep it lit that will have you dipping in and out of your inventory and juggling your hands and so on. It's only from the game knowing exactly what it wants to be that it earns the freedom to play around with its mechanics and your expectations to keep providing new, interesting scenarios that will have you considering its mechanics in new ways. There's another little interlude space here that's like a lobby area for this building, though you can pretty much just hop right through here without taking a look around and you won't miss too much important. I still find this to be one of the more interesting spaces in the game. Compared to the rusty metal shafts and corridors leading up to it, this area is almost cozy. Insofar as a like dingy church basement vibe can be cozy, it's just a reminder that humans were in fact meant to inhabit this space at one point. That this all served some purpose other than for Mr. John Knuckle to climb up. There's a short lab area after this that features some manner of unorthodox gravity. Not sure what they were supposed to be doing in here, but you'll find all sorts of floating obstacles and weird gravity fields to traverse. This area is short but sweet. I quite enjoy the shakeup in visuals, and the gravity manipulation was a neat twist for a fairly short area, and something I wouldn't mind being expanded on later. There's at least hints of how this could be expanded in endless mode, which gives me some hope. There's also a new sort of enemy starting here, which is just turrets. They're stationary, but if they spot you, they will light you up and make progressing past their cone of vision really difficult. The best way to deal with them, short of just avoiding them, is to get behind them and knock them over. Or sometimes they'll have a control panel that shuts them down. And that's as far as I can tell. I'm sure you actually have quite a lot of options. Perhaps throwing something at them will knock them over too. I'm not sure I ever tried that. Maybe finally a use for all those bricks you stored up that you were totally going to use for something. And then we move on to the current final area of early access, which is actually possibly my favorite in the whole game so far. I think it was here that I realized just how much White Knuckle has really got it. It's not that I didn't like or even really like the game up to this point, but when you've played only the demo area, it's easy to imagine the game might just get harder by throwing tougher climbing challenges at you, speeding up the pursuing sludge, and just calling it a day. So entering this second half of the current scope of the game and finding that it was not content to rest on those laurels and instead decided to constantly shake things up with new monsters, new sources of friction, new climbing challenges, and so on was extremely refreshing. And it gives me a lot of hope that this game will be absolutely incredible and varied down its full stretch. This final area is the most maze-like so far, with a mess of similar-looking cells and twisting networks of vents connecting them. This could be a negative depending on how you look at it, but I found the maze-like nature of this area to be actually quite compelling. I wouldn't want too much of this game to be like this, but as this is the first time the game really asks you to put a little sweat equity into navigation, I find it pretty welcome. I think the monster of this area really complements this as well. When you enter this area the first time, you get some diegetic hints on how to deal with this enemy from graffiti in the vents. And normally, I don't know if I'd be a huge fan of a game just spelling out a cool mechanic like this, but in this instance, I think it's fine. Not only is there still a lot to figure out about this enemy still, but deciphering what exactly this graffiti is saying still does require some first-hand experience. Basically, your pressure source throughout this area is these hands. These will slowly pursue you when you're not looking and retreat out of your sight line when you look at them. If they get close enough, they'll grab you and start to pull you. What you can do to combat this is, as the game suggests, just hold on for dear life until they let go. This adds all sorts of unique wrinkles in terms of stamina management, awareness, and navigation as you climb through this area, and works as a really satisfying final test for the currently available stretch of the game. If I had to levy a minor complaint here, it's just that sitting there and holding onto a handhold isn't exactly the most compelling gameplay, but I think it still works fine because what you want to do is just minimize the amount of times you get grabbed anyways, by staying aware of where the hands are approaching from and just keeping an eye on them. This may sound easy, but when you're also focused on climbing generally upwards, it is far easier said than done to keep a constant watch on a hand that might be approaching from behind or below you. By the end of this area, I consistently have 2, if not more, hands bearing down on me. It's wildly intense. I actually found that if you let the hands drag you, you can even make some upward progress this way. You still need to be careful because if you let them grab you for too long without grabbing onto something yourself, you will just die. But I like that this enemy had an actual benefit to you in certain scenarios as well. Sort of like how you can use the barnacle tendrils as a temporary handhold if you're desperate, or get a little jump boost off the exploding bugs. I'm a big fan of this idea that pretty much all of the enemies in this game can be leveraged to your advantage if you're smart about how you interact with them. In this area too, I found myself actually backtracking and climbing backwards pretty often. The only source of pressure is the hands, so as long as you manage them, you can navigate this area at really whatever pace you want. You're not gonna get like swallowed by the ooze. I even managed to find my way into the nest of the hands, which was a dead end, but it was a pretty insane and surprising moment. I don't know if there's any way you can interact with the nest, though I wasn't gonna not try. But even if this is just a little Easter egg, it is a damn cool one. Finally, once you've navigated this maze, you get an ominous little teaser of the next area before stepping into the light, and that's it. That's it, I say, as if that isn't a shitload of stuff for an early access game. Currently, White Knuckle's campaign caps out at a little over 2,000 meters climbed. It's tough to say what all is planned for this game, but it does have an achievement for 10K meters climbed, which could be an indication of just how big this game will be when it's done, but probably that's just for endless mode. You never know though. Given that already in early access, my first clear took an hour and a half, though that was including dying and respawning at a checkpoint a few times before ultimately succeeding, it's tough to say just how much more this roguelike framework can handle before it's simply just too much. But the current end of early access does a good job of both feeling satisfying while also leaving me extremely intrigued and excited for what's all to come. Either way, though, it's hard not to feel like White Knuckle already more than justifies that measly price tag of $13, even for what's already on offer here in just early access. You can hardly get 2 IPAs for that price in my city, and I played this for longer than 2 beers last, and I probably enjoyed it more. But instead of this just being a recommendation for White Knuckle, I really want to sound off by talking about just what it is that puts this game over that line of great and into excellent, that has made it an unsuspecting candidate for being one of my favorite games of the year, despite me not being huge on horror games and not having a real specific interest in climbing. Most of my favorite games of all time can be categorized as games that are relatively easy to grasp, but difficult, if not impossible to master. I like being drawn in by a relatively simple suite of mechanics that ultimately reveal layers of complexity, difficulty, and mastery underneath the surface. And White Knuckle is just constantly pulling back the curtain little by little and revealing these wrinkles to you. And literally everything else about this game just surrounds and serves that core beautifully. White Knuckle has wrapped everything from a small dose of roguelike upgrades and systems, to horror themes, to endless modes and challenge maps, around this core of a fast and sweaty climbing sim to just elevate a great experience to even greater heights. No pun intended. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this general kind of format because there's more where this came from. But feel free to let me know what you think in the comments. I'm just getting back from a bit of a break from uploading and streaming, but I am back. I made some changes to my channel, so if you're curious about that, there's going to be an update video on my second channel that you can check out. I'll leave a link to that. And quick interjection here that I didn't feel like setting up the green screen for. If you are interested at all in some behind the scenes of this video, I have soft relaunched my second channel, which used to be called Dumpsterman Clips, now Dumpsterman 2, where I plan to upload a lot more frequent supplementary content, which might be interesting to you if you feel like I upload too slowly here on the main channel, which, fair. Going up within a few days of this video will be a bit of a vlog of a full week in my life as I work on finishing up this video. So a little insight into my editing and video creation process, as well as just some of what else I got up to, including a very eventful visit to the Minnesota State Fair. I think it's a fun video and it was something new for me and a bit out of my comfort zone, so subscribe over there and check that out. Lastly, I think I am going to reopen my Patreon before the end of the year. Right now I'm just doing a Ko-fi instead since I was on a bit of a break, as just a way for people to support me with no strings attached. But I think I have enough momentum and ideas coming up that I feel comfortable starting a Patreon with like tiers and benefits and stuff like that again. In the meantime though, if you support me on Ko-fi for $3 or more, just one time and link your Discord, I will give you sub/patron benefits on my Discord through the end of the year, including access to an exclusive channel in my Discord and 1 day early access to all of my future main channel videos and more, probably. Still working out exactly what all I want to do, but I can promise that much at minimum. Probably the cheapest it will ever be to support me and actually get something in return if that interests you at all. All the links below, and stay tuned for the eventual relaunch of the Patreon. And if you enjoyed some of those gameplay and stream bits from this video, please come check out my Twitch stream where I am also back to streaming somewhat regularly. Hope you all have been doing well, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace. Mike's fucking heavy. Why did I do this to myself? I gotta put this down. It's so fucking heavy, chat. Why are you like this microphone?